Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be setting up my journal for the month of March, and of course I'm using my bullet journal from Art and Olive, and you can use my code ARTandBUJOS to get 10% off. Now first let's do a flip through of my last setup. I really loved the color palette because it was a bit more vibrant but still pretty simple. And then for March I wanted to do another colorful theme. This time I wanted to do one with water lilies. I did one back in September of 2021 and it became one of my favorite themes because that's also when I made the switch to more simple themes. So for the color palette I picked out a darker and a lighter shade of green, both more on like the bluish side, and also this bright sort of peachy pink shade and a very light pink for some of the backgrounds. Lastly, I'm also going to be using a gold gel pen, which I haven't used in a while, but I wanted to add it for some small gold accents. On the first page, as always, I'm doing a small overview of the month, and I used the light pink as a background for the weekdays on the top. And as for the sizing, it's the same as for the last couple of months. So each day is 2 spaces wide, and then I'm writing the dates into 1 space and also leaving 1 space empty in between the weeks. I wrote the weekdays on top with the peachy pink and the dates underneath with the lighter green shade because I wanted those two to be the sort of main colors for this setup. I also added some lines with the darker green in between the weeks and crossed out the last few days from February with the gold gel pen. For the cover page, I started by drawing the water lilies, and I included some lily pads, the actual flowers, and then also some smaller flowers and small round leaves that you can sometimes see in ponds where they just kind of float on the surface, and I thought it would just look really cute. As for the placement, I wanted to add the doodles on the bottom left and the top right of the title, and then later add a border so it's overall in a rectangular shape, which you'll see a bit better later on. For the lily pads, I used the darker green for the outlines, and I usually drew one on top of the other because they're usually kind of grouped together like that, and I also used it for the smaller round leaves. Then I colored them in with the lighter green, and for the flowers I used the bright peachy pink for the outlines and then the light pink to fill them in, and I really loved the way it came out without any black, but I tried out a bunch of different variations before this one, so if you're trying to come up with a theme, feel free to experiment a bit before settling on a design. I think it's always really helpful. I also tried a bunch of different colors, so as always, if you would like to recreate this theme, you don't need the exact same markers. I think what's most important is usually just the contrast between the colors, so how dark and light they are, and you could also just swap the peachy pink for like a more rosy pink or even a red tone, and the greens could also be more like olive tones as well, so just try out which colors work for you. To fill in the smaller gaps, I went in with the gold gel pen and added a bunch of little sparkles, which also helps to fill in the shape that I wanted to create, but as always I tried not to go overboard so that it doesn't look too chaotic. For the border, I used the light pink and I just added the other 2 corners that were empty, and then I wrote the title into the middle of the page with the bright peachy pink marker, and I made the letters a bit more wide and also more rounded, which I thought fit the theme the best. And that's it for these first 2 pages, so let's move on to my habit trackers. I wanted to keep the titles really simple, so I just wrote habits into the middle of the page on the top and then added 2 lines in gold to fill in the empty space. Then for the trackers, I first used the light pink as a background for the titles, and I placed 6 in total, 3 on the left and 3 on the right side, so that there's enough space in the middle for some doodles. Next I used the lighter green shade for the borders, and the trackers are 7 spaces wide and 6 spaces tall so that I can write the weekdays into the first row of the sections. I left 1 space empty underneath the titles and another one in between each tracker so that there's a bit more white space. And then next up I'm writing the weekdays with the darker green shade into the first row of each section, and then I used the peachy pink for the title so that everything looks nice and consistent. This month I'm changing up my habits slightly because I noticed that I pretty much always fill out some of the trackers completely, so I don't feel like I need to track them anymore, so this time I'm tracking my morning routine, getting up before 9 AM, stretching, doing some 3D modeling, studying Korean, which I haven't done in a while, and doing my nighttime routine. Then I also used the gold gel pen to cross out the days from February again, and as you can see I always try to include all of the colors so that everything looks nice and consistent, but I also tried to use some of the colors more than others depending on which one are the sort of main colors in my doodles. Speaking of, I filled in this middle section with more lily pads and water lilies, so I first sketched everything with pencil so that I can figure out the placement and there are no weird gaps, and then I went through the same process as on the cover page. So I used the dark green first for the outlines of the lily pads and the smaller round leaves, and I tried to always vary them a bit so they look more natural and not too similar. And then I used the peachy pink again for the flowers, and as for how many petals they have, I usually went for around 7, but you could also do more or less. I didn't really count them, but it just worked out pretty well like this. Next, I went in with the lighter green to color in the leaves, and I also used it in some places to add little waves to the lily pads so that they look like they're floating in water. Then for the flowers, I colored in the petals with the light pink shade, and the middle as well as the smaller flowers with the peachy pink, and I really just loved all these colors together. It might be one of my new favorite color palettes so far, so let me know what you think in the comments. Lastly, I went in with the gold gel pen here and there, and I also added a small border on the top and the bottom with the light pink. Underneath, I wanted to add my usual weekly habits, so I wrote them with the dark and the light green, alternating between the two shades, and I'm tracking the same ones as always, so making my weekly spreads, having a little self-care day, doing my weekly reset, and practicing piano. And then to track them, I added 5 circles on the right with the peachy pink, and then once I complete them, I color them in, and if I don't, I cross them out, which you can also see in my flip through if you're curious. For the other page, I'm making my usual planning sections, so I first wrote March on the top, and then I'm adding those gold lines on the sides, and then I used the light pink as a background for the titles of the sections. I always just make the same 6 sections because they work really well for me, and I'm also not too precise about the sizing, I just sort of eyeball it, but they're always 11 spaces wide, and I leave 2 spaces empty in between them horizontally and 1 space vertically. I wanted to incorporate all of the colors again, so I'm making the borders on the top and the bottom with the lighter green, and then the 2 in the middle with the darker green shade. Next, I'm writing the titles with the peachy pink again, and the sections are for my monthly tasks, my workouts, YouTube related stuff, self-care ideas, events, and lastly some goals, and I wrote the titles into the middle of the sections by just counting the grid spaces, and I also added some sparkles into the corners with the gold gel pen. And that's these 2 pages all done, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of March. For this spread, I used a layout where the sections are a bit smaller and sort of offset, so the sections on the left page are placed on the top with some doodles along the bottom, and on the right page the other way around, so the sections are on the bottom and the doodles are on the top. So this time I made them 13 spaces tall, and as always they're 11 spaces wide with 2 spaces in between them horizontally and also vertically for a bit more white space. As you can see, I added a mini calendar into that first section, and I just gave it a border with the light pink, and then for the daily sections I used that same shade again as a background for the titles on the top, so I placed Monday through Wednesday on the left page and then Thursday through Sunday on the right. Again, since I wanted to include all of the colors, I used both of the green shades for the borders, and I just alternated diagonally so that it looks a little bit more balanced. I also left 1 space empty underneath the titles once again so that there's a bit more white space and the sections don't look too cramped. Next up, I wrote the weekdays with the peachy pink, and I just wrote the first 3 letters into the middle of each section, and I spaced out the letters quite a bit and also added the dates in the bottom right corner with the gold gel pen, which I think gives it a nice accent. Lastly, for the doodles, I used the light pink for a small border on the sides, and then I added a bunch more lily pads and flowers, and again I sketched them first with pencil so that the placement is more even. I always try to make sure that there are some lily pads or the other smaller leaves in between the flowers so that there's not too much of one color in one space, and that just makes it look a bit more interesting. Now, since I don't really have anything else to add here, I just wanted to talk about a few questions that I've gotten recently, which some of you might also have. So the first one is if I will be posting my weekly spreads to Instagram, and unfortunately I don't think I will start posting on Instagram again anytime soon because it's just not that much fun for me anymore, and it's also just one more thing to remember and think about. But I was wondering if you guys would like me to post them here on YouTube as a community post, because I feel like that's a lot less pressure because I don't have to think about making my feet look pretty and everything. So if that's something you would like to see, let me know in the comments. And then another question I recently got is where I get all of my markers. So for the Tombow markers, I just sort of collected them over the years. I bought some sets in the beginning and then later on some individual ones. And then as for the Ohuhu markers, they were actually gifted to me as part of a collaboration with them. But they are actually really affordable, especially compared to like the Tombow markers. So if you're in the budget, they might be a good option. But anyway, that's it for the setup, so let's do a little flip through. I'm really happy with how this one turned out, and as always, the doodles were actually really quick and easy to do, so I hope you enjoyed it as well. I think this color palette might be one of my new favorites because it's just really bright, and I think the greens and the peachy pink work together really well. So let me know what you think in the comments and which page was your favorite. I think for me, it might be the habit trackers or maybe just the cover page. If you enjoy my content and would like to see more, don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any questions or ideas, leave them in the comments. I always love reading them, and I try to reply to each and every one of them. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye!